السنة مثل سفينة نوح، من ركبها نجا ومن تركها غرق.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله، وكفى بالله شهيدا، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد. As to what proceeds, once again, with the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Most High, we meet once again for our weekly meeting to study the book Al-Uṣūl ath-Thalathah, illustrated by the Imam, the Mujaddid, Shaykh Al-Islām of his time, Muhammad ibn al-Wahhāb at-Tamīmī, rahimahullah ta'ala. Currently we are discussing the preface, or the madkhal as it is known as, for Al-Uṣūl ath-Thalathah. And our previous discussions were regarding this book or this text, Al-Uṣūl ath-Thalathah, is addressing which group of people, or in simpler words, who did Shaykh Al-Islām Muhammad ibn Abdullah rahimahullah ta'ala write this text for? Who was his intended audience? Man al-Mukhatab. We came to know that the audience that this text was written for or directed to was the Ammatun Nas. And we were previously discussing the benefit or the fa'idah of Ma'rifatul Mukhatab. What is the benefit of knowing who the book has been illustrated for? And I believe that we went half through this issue, discussed half of it, and the other half remains today. The author, write this, and the audience was general public. I think I left off with regards to mentioning a story which Shaykh Ḥusayn Ibn Mahdī al-Nu'mi, rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in the year 1187 after Hijrah. He mentioned that there were two men traveling from Mecca intending to go to Taif. One of them considered himself to be a man of knowledge. And this is the musibah that we have today. The musibah that we have today is when certain individuals who have zero credentials consider themselves to be from amongst the people of knowledge, and they put themselves forward to teach and sit where the students of knowledge and the ulama sit when they teach the people. For many of them, their credentials don't go past a few Umrah trips or a few months in a private institute learning the Arabic language in Egypt. And this has always been problematic. This has always been problematic. So these two men were traveling from Mecca to Taif. One of them used to consider himself to be from the people of knowledge. The other person, or the other man, who was a layman and who was upon the fitrah. Al-fitrah meaning the natural disposition that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the human being, which is al-ubudiyyah for him, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said to his friend who is supposed to be a man of knowledge, he said, Ahlu Ta'if la ya'rifun Allah. People of Ta'if, they don't know who Allah is. But they know who Ibn Abbas is, because supposedly the grave of Abdullah ibn Abbas is in Ta'if, because that's where he settled. So the one who was supposed to be from the people of knowledge responded back to this statement of his friend who is a layman, saying, for them to know Ibn Abbas is sufficient, because he is the one who knows Allah. So this was the condition of those who were considered to be the people of knowledge. And at that time, students of Shaykh Al-Islām Muhammad al-Wahhāb ta'ala, they mentioned that in their time, some people who used to say that they are from the people of knowledge, that they have studied, if any calamity would befall them, they would stand up and make istighathah for this calamity to be removed with other than Allah. So if this was the condition of those who were considered to be people of knowledge, who the general public looked up at, then what do you say with regards to the general public? What do you think their condition must have been? So when we look at the time period of Muhammad ibn al-Wahhāb rahimahullah ta'ala's da'wah, it's very important that we understand the timeline and the surroundings of Shaykh Al-Islām Muhammad ibn al-Wahhāb rahimahullah ta'ala, and what was the condition of the people. And I've mentioned this before and previously, that it is very important whenever you study a book of a scholar a few hundred years back, you need to know the time that he lived in, what was the condition and the surroundings of such a scholar. By this, you're able to determine some of the books or some of the discussions that the scholar may have had or written. So he was from Najd. Najd is the Riyadh. Riyadh is the capital of Saudi Arabia at this time. Riyadh, a city, is within the province of Najd. The level of ignorance that could be found amongst the people of Najd was that they did not even know the simplest of issues. Something which a normal Muslim would not be ignorant of, like knowing how to make wudu and how to pray. And in certain places where, in the desert, you found that some of the Bedouins, they even started to disbelieve in the resurrection. And this was something which was not only restricted to Najd by itself. That this condition of the people, its start was not from the time of Muhammad ibn al-Wahhāb rahimahullah ta'ala, or before him, a little time before him. But this was going on now, Allah knows best, for decades. So ignorance prevailed amongst the people for a long period of time in Najd and other than Najd. And the result of ignorance, its result was the manifestation of ash-shirk wa ad-dalāl, associating partners with Allah and misguidance. And this is what happens when ignorance prevails amongst the people. Then people fall into clear misguidance and shirk with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At the same time, heresies, bid'ah, and ignorant actions started spreading one by one, to the extent that the young were nurtured and cultivated upon this, and they became old upon this. And this happened generation after generation, that the young were cultivated, their upbringing was upon misguidance and polytheism, shirk, and heresies, bid'ah, and dalalat, misguidances, until that person became old upon that. And then these distortions of the religion, from polytheism to heresies to misguidance, this became the landmark or the motto of the deen of Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the reason for this was that they found their forefathers and their predecessors upon this. And they would say, Inna ala atharihim muqtadun. We're just following the footsteps of those who have preceded us. In Najd, there was the grave of Zayd ibn al-Khattab, the brother of Umar ibn al-Khattab. And people used to go to this grave and ask Zayd ibn al-Thabit that, "Oh Zayd, come to my rescue and free me from this calamity and help me and fulfill my needs." And there were other graves in the province of Najd. And the people would do exactly the same at the other graves of anybody who they considered to be special. There was a tree there in Najd called Fahl al-Fuhul. And people would go to this tree and call upon this tree and ask from this tree from other than Allah. A woman would come to this tree and she would ask this tree, supplicate to this tree from other than Allah. She would say, Ya Fahl al-Fuhul, a'tini kada wa kada. Oh Fahl al-Fuhul, addressing the tree, give me such and such. There was a tree there that the people would seek blessings from it. And there were other ignorant practices which were practiced by the people, as it has been clearly outlined by Shaykh Ḥusayn Ibn Mahdī in his Tarīkh, Rawdatul Afkar. This is a book of Tarīkh of Najd. One of the books of the Tarīkh of Najd is Rawdatul Afkar by Ibn Mahdī. And all that I have mentioned to you has been concurred by the likes of Abdul Latif Ibn Abdul Rahman Ibn Hassan al-Shaykh, Sheikh Abdullah Ababateen, the great historian of Najd known as Ibn Bishr, Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Baz, or Sheikh Abdullah ibn Hamid. But this picture that I have portrayed for you now has even been confirmed and affirmed by the enemies of the Salafi Da'wah. For example, a great American writer, he authored a book on Hadar al-Alam al-Islam. And he drew a picture, meaning, when I drop it, meaning he described the condition of the people during the time of Muhammad ibn al-Wahhāb, rahimahullah ta'ala. And he said that the religion, honestly speaking, it had been blackened. He said that the oneness of the religion that Muhammad Rasulullah came in, meaning the Tawheed that he came in, had been covered away, or had become fictitious or untrue by the contrary practices and the embedment of the Sufis, until it was said that the name Muslimun had in reality been changed, as though they were the Muslims were in reality not Muslims. Due to these circumstances, Muhammad al-Wahhāb rahimahullah ta'ala wrote Al-Uṣūl ath-Thalathah and sent it to some different locations. Those locations in which the manifestation of shirk had become apparent. For example, in one of his letters directed to a particular area, he addresses the people in that locality by saying, وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تُنْكِرُونَ هَذِهِ الْأَوْثَانِ الَّتِي تُعْبَدْ فِي الْخَرَجِ. Kharaj is a place, he says, you people do not forbid this evil with regards to these awthan, these idols, these statues that are worshipped other than Allah. And it's possible that he even called such people at-Tawaghit. And what he meant by at-Tawaghit, which is the plural of Taghut, is that those scholars, he called them Tawaghit, who would beautify a shirk and call it at-Tawheed and deceive the people and invite them to it. And the calamity or the musibah, this calamity and this musibah was not only just restricted to the major shirk and disbelief, الشرك الأكبر والكفر الأكبر صراح, explicit, meaning not even hidden. But it goes beyond this to something which is much greater and much severe, with bitterness. We say this with bitterness, and that is the bala, or the calamity, which was adjoined to the deen of Musa alayhi salam. And what happened to the deen of Musa alayhi salam? Tasmiyatul kufri bi ismi al-Islam. That the kufr and shirk was named as being al-Islam. So al-kufr became al-Islam. Al-shirk al-akbar became al-Tawheed. And because of this, the millah of Ibrahim and the millah of Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam in reality only remained and survived by its name. And due to this, all that has now been mentioned, Shaykh Al-Islām ʿAbd rahimahullah ta'ala illustrated his book. And we find also that when Shaykh Al-Islām Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah decided to refute Ahlul Kitab, the Christians in particular, he wrote his book Al-Jawāb al-Sahīh liman baddala Deen al-Masīh, a complete amendment and alteration of the deen of Isa alayhi salam. And they altered and changed everything, and then they said that this is the deen of Isa, this is the deen that came to us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, in conclusion to what has been mentioned in our previous meeting and just now, the one who knows the reason of why this text was written, Al-Uṣūl ath-Thalathah, then it is incumbent upon that person that he knows the reality of those receptors and addressees that Shaykh Al-Islām addressed it to. And he also needs to know the corruption, the reality of the corruption that the author intended to correct and rectify. And by this we understand the benefit of knowing who the receptors or the addressees were when Shaykh Al-Islām al-Wahhāb wrote Al-Uṣūl ath-Thalathah. And I would like to mention lastly, before we finish this issue, a beautiful statement of a scholar by the name of ʻAbdullāh al-Anqārī, rahimahullah, one of the scholars of Najd, and ad-Durr has mentioned this. He says, مَعْرِفَةُ سَبَبِ التَّصْنِيفِ مِمَّا يُعِينُ عَلَى فَهْمِ كَلَامِ الْعُلَمَاءِ. He says that knowing the reason of why that book was illustrated, if you have that knowledge, then that knowledge will help you and assist you to understand the speech of the ulama, just by knowing this, of who the addressee is and who the receptor is. This is the benefit of knowing this. For the last 10-15 minutes that I have been speaking, is to come to this conclusion, understanding the background reading and the condition in his time, before his time, helps us to understand his speech coherently and clearly. Abdullah al-Anqārī rahimahullah, he says, مَعْرِفَةُ سَبَبِ التَّصْنِيفِ مِمَّا يُعِينُ عَلَى فَهْمِ كَلَامِ الْعُلَمَاءِ. مَعْرِفَةُ سَبَبِ التَّصْنِيفِ مِمَّا يُعِينُ عَلَى فَهْمِ كَلَامِ الْعُلَمَاءِ. بارك الله فيكم. This is the gist of what has just now been mentioned. And we discussed in length that man al-mukhatab, who is the receptor or the addressee of this book. Why is it so important to know this? Naam, is that clear so far? Any questions? So by this, alhamdulillah, now we have finished this issue of who the Shaykh Al-Islām rahimahullah ta'ala. And I don't know if you find this beneficial, or if you think I was just waffling, or if you think this is not beneficial, or if you see that we may have studied Usul ath-Thalathah with others, and you may have not come across of anything what has been mentioned here today. But when we studied with the ulama, all that I am teaching you was passed on to me. So I'm just passing on to you what was passed on to me. Maybe the West is not accustomed to study Al-Usul ath-Thalathah like this. Wallahu a'lam. But I feel that my students should be acquainted with that which I have been acquainted with. So this is a beautiful benefit that you can write from ad-Durr al-Sanniya. If anybody wants to write this benefit and put it on their stories and that, volume 9, page 158, Abdullah al-Anqārī, Ain, Noon, Al-Alif, Al, and then Ain, Noon, Qaf, Ra, and Ya, al-Anqārī. He said this in ad-Durr al-Sanniya, volume 9, page 158. And this is a thumb rule. A thumb rule which will benefit everybody. Now we have Tanbīhāt Muhimma, some important points to alert the student of knowledge. 9 points. Does anybody know a good translation for Tanbīhāt? I've been thinking about how to translate Tanbīhāt, but I just haven't had time to actually consider a suitable translation for it. So after covering what we have covered, and all these issues becoming clear to us, which we have come to know or learn with regards to the strong impact that the text of Al-Uṣūl ath-Thalathah has or had, and everything that it concerns with regards to the best path and the most complete path on how should we deal with this text, how should our relationship be with this text. And that was basically to clarify موضوع الرسالة والمخاطب بها في الأصل. It was for us to know the subject of this text and who was being addressed on this text and the reason of why this text was written. Now some 9 warnings, cautionings, exhortations, whatever you want to call them, but there's 9 that we need to understand. And after we have completed this 9, then the time has now come for us to move to the text. Once these 9 are complete, and then the madkhal is complete, then we are now ready to move into the phase of actually learning and reading the text and explaining it. At-Tanbīh al-Awwal, or the first point of alerting the sense of knowledge. So seeking the aid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bi'awnihi wa qudratihi. Shaykh Al-Islām Muhammad al-Wahhāb rahimahullah ta'ala, as we have come to know, has wrote ثلاثة al-Uṣūl plenty of times. From what we understand is that we find many manuscripts of this risala or this text. The nuskha or the edition that has been circulated in the schools in Saudi Arabia begins with the statement اعلم رحمك الله أنه يجب علينا تعلم 4 مسائل الأولى العلم. This text can be found in الدرر السنية في الأجوبة النجدية in volume 1 between the pages 125 to 136. And after this edition, there is another edition that can be found from volume 1, page 137 to 143. And then we find another third edition from 147 to 151. And then we find a fourth nuskha from 151 to 158. How many rasa'il of Shaykh Al-Islām that I mentioned now? And every single nuskha, or every single nuskha from the first is different from the second is different from the third is different from the fourth. There is variances and things that have been mentioned in one have not been mentioned in the other. يعني من جهة الزيادة أو النقص. But The subject of the mawdu' of Risala is one. The goal is one. The meaning or the message of the Risala is one. And we know that, and that is تقرير توحيد الإلهية مع إضافة مهمات للدين, or تعليم مهمات الدين. So I'm just going to mention a few variances of the different prints that you understand. All the versions of al-Uṣūl that we have, all of them discussed the first fundamental, which is ma'rifatul ʿabd. All of them discussed the second fundamental, which is ma'rifatul ʿabd dīnah. And then after that, all of them generally mentioned about what is Islam, Iman and Ihsan. And all of the four versions, they all talk about the third foundation or fundamental, which is ma'rifatul Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Secondly, from amongst the four editions, three editions, they talk about, or that which has been discussed, is that the first of the messengers that was sent was Nuh, and the last amongst them was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, except for the fourth version. So the first three they do. Now let me reframe that again. Number one, the first version, the third version, and the fourth version, they all talk about those who reject al-Ba'th, resurrection, except, with the exception of the second version or edition. So these are some of the things which I wanted for you to know, or what has been and has not been mentioned in two, and what has been mentioned in general, with some variances in the word. So what we can say is that the different editions or versions that we have, unanimously they agree upon the mawdu' and the hadaf, the subject and the objective, except that there are some slight variances between them in terms of what was mentioned first and then what was mentioned later in a different edition and mentioned first in another edition, which we call at-taqdeem wa-ta'khir. From this, what we understand on the importance of making a comparison between the different versions and the variances that can be found within them, is that the author did not restrict himself to following a rigid methodology with a rigid wording in particular. But all he intended was, whenever he wrote these versions, was that he just wanted the subject and the goal to be clear. But we find that this was permitted for him to do so, or this was allowed for him to do so, because his audience was the general public, so that they could rectify and correct their Islam, and that he could adopt an usloob, or the technique that he adopted was that they would be able to understand what they are being addressed with, and that he is considerate with regards to their level of understanding and the surroundings that they lived with, without adopting or adhering to the normal or the classical or the standard methodology of illustration, as it is apparent. So he did not follow, when you write academically, when you write in academia, Western academia, you have to follow some guidelines that have been set. Because Shaykh Al-Islam's audience wasn't a particular, or if you're writing for the people of knowledge or for the Tullāb al-Ilm, there's a particular style that you may adopt, or you have to adopt. But because it was for the normal people, then that was not done. If it is now becomes clear to us that this was the intent and the doing of Shaykh Al-Islām Muhammad al-Wahhāb rahimahullah ta'ala, this is why he did this, then it is wrong to treat this illustration and to judge it as you would judge other books which were written with rules and regulations and standards that have been set. So it would be wrong of you to say and compare Al-Uṣūl ath-Thalathah or Thalathat al-Uṣūl with Nukhbat al-Fiqh or any other book. Why? Because these illustrations were written by following and adopting the guidelines that have been set by the people of knowledge. They have a criteria. They have rules and regulations, qanun, in how to illustrate. So he did not address in particular, although the students of knowledge and the ulama have benefited from this illustration, and this is due to his sincerity and his simple language that he used, and due to the style of his illustration, mainly containing the ayats of the Quran and hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the speech of the scholars of the past, you find that even those who possess knowledge have benefited from this. So you see some people, they come forward and they will say to you, at the start of this illustration, they will say to you that Muhammad al-Wahhāb, he said, al-ilmu wa huwa ma'rifatullahi wa ma'rifatu rasulihi wa ma'rifatu din al-Islami bil-adillah. They will say, so Muhammad al-Wahhāb, he defines knowledge as ma'rifah. But knowledge has been defined as ma'rifah, and this is the madhab of fulan, and the other scholar has opposed him, has opposed this definition, and at-tahqiq on that which is correct with regards to al-ilm is not that it's ma'rifah, and all this kalam that they will bring, somehow some try to bring in order to put down Shaykh Al-Islām ḥafظه rahimahullah ta'ala. They say they didn't define knowledge properly. So in response we say that this is contrary to those who try to find faults or mistakes in the very first sentence of this Risala. And we don't say this because we have some fanaticism for Muhammad al-Wahhāb rahimahullah ta'ala. What is our position with regards to Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab rahimahullah ta'ala? Sha'nuhu sha'nul ulama. That his status is that he's a scholar from amongst the scholars. يُؤْخَذُ مِنْ قَوْلِهِ وَيُرَدْ. His statement can be accepted or rejected. His opinion can be accepted or rejected. And if he has made a mistake, then he is to be corrected and pointed out that he made a mistake. But when somebody makes a claim and tries to find a mistake, then we have to be just and see whether it really is a mistake, whether this person has brought substantial evidence to justify his argument, which is not the case here. Because in response to those who say that Muhammad al-Wahhab rahimahullah ta'ala's definition of al-ilm is different to the generic definition of al-ilm as it can be found in the books of the people of knowledge, the response to this is that he did not intend al-ma'na al-daqiq. He did not intend the precise definition of knowledge. Due to him addressing or illustrating this risala, not as we mentioned to the people, for the people of knowledge or the students of knowledge, but for the ammatun nas. Some others also try to find some form of istidrak, some form of mistake by saying that Muhammad al-Wahhab, he said, "Ash-shirku huwa da'watu ghayri Allahi ma'ah." Shirk is to call upon other than Allah with him. They say that this definition is not jami' and mani, meaning that it's not a complete type of definition which is comprehensive. Rather, the definition of shirk is kada wa kada. So this is another question that has been asked with regards to Muhammad al-Wahhāb rahimahullah ta'ala in his definition of shirk in this context and in this risala. In response, we say that anybody who wants to have some type of ta'qeeb, meaning somebody wants to follow up and find a mistake or make this assumption that he has found a mistake, Muhammad al-Wahhāb rahimahullah ta'ala, then it is better for him to add to this claim and clarify what was the reason of why Muhammad al-Wahhāb rahimahullah said this. And that is that Muhammad al-Wahhāb rahimahullah ta'ala wanted to correct the mistake of the people concerning Asluddin, the foundation of the religion, and its principle, and that is Tawheed al-Ilahi. Due to the people absolutely falling into that which is contrary to it, clearly. And due to them swerving away from Tawheed, that which was very clearly apparent, that this khalal, although this moving away and swerving away, or this deficiency, was due to a major mistake and blunder, and that was to make dua to other than Allah and make istighatha with Him, seek assistance from other than Allah. So when he knew that this was the perception of the people, so when he addressed them with shirk, he addressed them with the same perception that they believed in, that this is what you deem to be Tawheed, but this is reality as-shirk, like I mentioned before. That your Tawheed is as-shirk, not at-Tawheed. So he defined this in the place which was in accordance and appropriate for the addressees and the receptors, so that the intent of his objective could be achieved. So it can be so that the person who's explaining Al-Uṣūl ath-Thalathah may follow up and may rectify what Shaykh Al-Islām said, but in a manner where you can say that the honor and the respect and the status of this text remains, and also with regards to the intent of Muhammad al-Wahhāb rahimahullah ta'ala. So for example, if somebody says that this definition of a shirk, as mentioned by Muhammad al-Wahhāb, due to the perception and in accordance to the understanding of the people, he may not accept this, then he may add to it the agreed upon definition, the generic definition. And by this, there is no harm in doing so. That's why you will find all the commentators, they do this, or those who explain the books, they do this. But this is that which is appropriate. Because this type of action where you say that this is what the muallif mentioned or the author mentioned, but this is reality, what it means comprehensive, then there's no problem in this. Because when he mentioned this action, when he did this, then this was due to him explaining what Tawheed was in its appropriate place. And he explained Tawheed and that which contradicted Tawheed. And that which is obligatory upon everybody is to explain what Tawheed is and that which contradicts it, whether it's Muhammad Abdul-Wahhab or any other person. But when you explain Tawheed and that which necessitates it and that which contradicts it, it's got to be in line with the understanding of the people. So it's upon us to protect the status of the scholar of where if he did not make a mistake, not due to him addressing the people and using different type of a definition to say that this definition is not comprehensive and it's wrong, knowing that the intent of Muhammad al-Wahhāb rahimahullah ta'ala, knowing what the definition was and not being extremely precise in it, is due to him addressing the normal people. And this is that which is important to know with regards to Muhammad al-Wahhāb rahimahullah ta'ala. And by this we finish the first Tanbīh with regards to Muhammad al-Wahhāb rahimahullah ta'ala. And it should be known that our position with Shaykh Al-Islām is that he is a scholar from amongst the scholars. We don't venerate him, nor are we fanatic about him, and nor will we defend him on his mistakes. He is a man from amongst the men. He is a scholar from amongst the scholars. He was a reviver from amongst the revivers, and he is human. So if he makes a mistake, which is in reality a mistake, then we will not be shameful to do so. And he has, because we are all humans. He made mistakes, and those who came before him made mistakes, and those who will come after him will make mistakes. As al-Isla, infallibility is only for Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The virtue is not also preserved for the Sahaba. And what about Muhammad rahimahullah ta'ala, who came almost 1,000 years after Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? We're extreme. We're not blind followers, and we're not fanatics. We're people who are balanced and who are just. Where he has made a mistake, we will say he's a mistake. Where he has not made a mistake and people will try to point out that this is a mistake, then we will defend it. This defense is not based upon fanatism. So the issue will come with regards to shirk, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, when we study the text, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Well, these issues are very intricate issues, and I think now you are ready to discuss these issues or study them. But for those of you who may have come new to this lesson and have not studied the previous lessons, then you need to go back and listen to the recordings, because this is a follow-up of the context in which we are discussing issues.
SubhanAllah, we'll stop here, and inshallah we'll meet again next week. Jazakumullahu khairah, wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. And we shall meet next week again, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills. 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 Subhanahu wa ta'ala